My name is Paul. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Innovation here at UC San Diego, and I'm really just here to welcome you and to find out who you guys are. So I believe we have quite a mix of people here tonight. We have a bunch of undergrad students. Undergrads, anybody? Cool. Graduate students? Excellent, excellent. Come on, stick up your hands, graduate students. Come on, come on. There's more of you out there than that. I know there is. There you go. Okay. Staff? Staff? Other staff? Very cool. This is a nice mix, actually. This is probably the best mix we've had for the certificate yet, I would say. Was there others out there that didn't put up their hand to anything? Outsiders? Where are you guys from? God, there's a lot of you. Who are you guys? Postdocs, I forgot postdocs. Postdocs, stick your hands up. Ah, that's it. Okay, we got the postdocs. Very good. How many, just out of sheer interest, how many of you guys are from pharmacy? Postdocs from pharmacy? Or anybody from pharmacy? Anybody from pharmacy? Interesting, okay. And yeah, Jim and I were talking earlier at the dean, so it's wonderful. So, anyways, as I said, welcome, and it's just stopped. There we go. First of all, congratulations on deciding to take this course. You guys are obviously the smart ones on campus, so well done. So what's this course all about? It's really about helping you guys in your careers, whether you're already in a career, it's helping you advance it. For you students, obviously, it's helping you to get jobs when you get out there, and particularly for those of you entrepreneurial-minded who are looking to start companies. We're helping to give you the skills that you're going to need to be able to do that. It's aimed at giving you a lot of different skills which you can apply across the board, really. So, just to give you an idea of some of the conversations that we have, more and more when we go to companies and we say, hey, companies, what are you looking for from students and postdocs and grad students and everybody when they get off campus? They need the problem solving, critical thinking, and technical skills and everything that you learn through your courses, but more and more what they're really looking for is the ability to be innovative, creative, strategic thinkers. And that's really what we're giving you the tools through this course to help you to hone those skills and to translate them into something that's useful, right? The other thing that employers really look for is experiences. Lots of people graduate, I hate to say this, but lots of people graduate with the degrees that you guys are going to graduate with, right? So how do you stand out in the madding crowd, as it were? And they're really looking for the experiences that you get. And that's partly what we're here to help you with as well. So, going through the experience of starting a company or developing a product or developing a social impact idea or whatever it is you want to do, that helps to, make you stand out on your resume, and it's interesting, and, employers go, oh, that's kind of interesting, and you'll probably get interviews and so on. So that's, partly what we're here to help you with. For the entrepreneurs in the audience, we would love you to start companies. UCSD is very much in the middle of driving the economic development of our region and beyond, and you guys are the future. You guys are the leaders that are going to really help to bring us to the next level in terms of the economy. So we are here to help you entrepreneurs to start companies. Even if you don't start companies immediately after you leave, because most of you actually won't, because you're going to have horrible debts to pay off, right? So you're going to need a job. But the entrepreneurs of you will certainly, if you don't do it immediately, you're going to get yourselves into a career and probably go back to it and decide you want to be masters of your own destiny after a while. So we have a lot of resources on campus beyond this. This is really just the first step. This is giving you the basic tools that you're going to need to go through the process. Things like leadership and team building and storytelling. Because for those of you who are engineers and scientists, you're horrible storytellers probably. It's one of the most difficult skills for people. How do you tell your story to an audience that really doesn't understand what you're talking about, right? And a lot of other skills that are just going to help you along the way. But as I said, this is just the first step. We have a huge number of resources across campus to help you beyond this. We have incubators and accelerator programs where you can go in and you can develop your ideas in your companies. You'll be surrounded by advisors and mentors and other people. You'll get to meet a lot of people like yourselves that are going through the same process. We have workshops and seminars and you name it. There's no reason why if you want to go down this path, you shouldn't be able to do it, and we'll be able to support you on every step of the way. So as I said, I run the Office of Innovation and Commercialization. We help to coordinate all of that for the campus, so feel free at any point to reach out to me, to any of my staff. We will help you with whatever your need is at that particular time so that you can be successful. Because if you're successful, then I look good and I'm successful. So that's what it's all about. In the meantime, I'm going to leave you in Greg's hands. Was there anything else I was supposed to say? No? That's it? Good. I do what he tells me to do. Greg is fantastic. He is a world-renowned expert in innovation ecosystems. Very, very lucky to have him here, so take full advantage of your time with him and make sure you ask him everything that you possibly want to ask him. And with that, again, enjoy the course. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. So, I can use a microphone or I don't have to. I tend to have a very, very loud voice, but if you have trouble hearing it, let me know. Happy to use this one. Can you hear me or not so well? Okay. When we decided to kind of build this course, one of the kind of primary requisites for this is that we didn't want it to be completely prescriptive, and we realized that not everyone cares really about entrepreneurship. So we really were targeting 3 types of people for this course. One were people that might think of themselves as an entrepreneur, or at least wanted to explore it, wanted to kind of understand it. 2, people who may want to work inside of an entrepreneurial or more dynamic organization. They may not see themselves as the entrepreneur themselves, but they kind of want to understand what it takes to kind of work in a highly dynamic and very often ambiguous organization that's kind of searching for that business opportunity. And the third are people who may work inside of existing institutions and want to bring more entrepreneurial thinking in that. So there's a lot of ways to look at entrepreneurship, entrepreneurialism, whatever you want to call it. There's a big debate about whether entrepreneurs are made and born. We're not going to get into that kind of hair splitting in this, but we are going to focus more on the human side of entrepreneurship. There's a lot of courses you can take here on campus that will go into a lot of the technical skills. In fact, we do workshops that will be able to drill a lot deeper into the details of things. So like when we get to finance, we aren't going to spend a lot of time talking about the difference between 1x liquidation preferences versus 3x liquidation preferences. What we are going to talk about is how do you need to present yourself to a set of investors? What are they going to ask you? What are the things you need to be prepared? And how do you kind of upgrade your own human operating system so that it takes advantage of all these wonderful business ideas and opportunities that you have? So we take a very kind of human-centric approach to that, which is why the very first session of what we're going to do is not about let's just immediately get our ideas onto paper and let's begin talking business models and business plans and, you know, if your idea is better than someone else's idea. The very first step is trying to think, how do you kind of use your head a little bit better? And what's so interesting is that when we're kids, our whole world exists inside of our head. It's imagination. And as we go through school, we begin filling up that brain with lots of knowledge and facts and figures and all the things we're told about the world so that we can, of course, interact with the world in a more productive manner. What also ends up happening, though, we often, because we don't exercise them enough, we lose a bit of our creativity and our creative muscles. That's why we find that a lot of wonderful entrepreneurs who have truly been disruptive also have an artistic side to them. Some of them musicians. My background, although I went to UCSD, I graduated with degrees in biochemistry, economics, but also music. And I find that that comes in very, very helpful when we're doing it, because entrepreneurship and innovation is actually a lot like jazz. It's a lot like kind of riffing off of one another, and you're with people, and you kind of take your idea and you throw it to somebody else. They take their own human experiences and knowledge, and they kind of throw it back to you. And it's kind of this dance you do. So it feels less like classical music, which are what we call production systems, and more like this improv, particularly until you kind of get your footing. So we're going to talk about what it really takes inside the brain. Now, we tend to, or I tend to really like the concept of design and design thinking. It's one of the things that helped inform a lot of my work. And as background, for those of you who may not have Googled or had learned about me before, I'm a serial entrepreneur. And I came to kind of the education and academic environment very, very late in life, kind of in the last third of my kind of career. The first part of my career was working in very traditional bricks and mortar type of companies, what we call predict and repeat. The second stage was I kind of got my feet wet in the Silicon Valley in technology, making all the mistakes that you could make, but we got lucky. This was in the 90s where you could be really not necessarily the smartest person in the room and still do really well. And a boss of mine always said, it's always better to be lucky than smart, but you have to know the difference. So I did know that I had gotten very, very lucky. That then gave me a lot of choices. So power is often all about having options. And I found that I had a number of options at my disposal. I came back to San Diego after doing a couple of companies and also doing some stint in venture. I was an entrepreneur in residence. And all that meant is that one of the firms that had invested in my company wanted me to start another company or be part of another company for them. And so they gave me a desk, a checkbook, and a hunting license. They said, go and find your next company. We did that, and we got lucky again. So I figured I was kind of pushing my luck with lightning striking twice in the same place. I took some time off, came back here to San Diego. I love it because I went to school here, began working with the local business accelerator called Connect. How many of you have heard of Connect? So some of you, it's a business accelerator, but back when it was started in 1985, those were kind of unusual. People really didn't do business incubation. People really didn't know what it meant. And basically, this program acted as a translator between the scientific and technical communities and the business communities. They kind of matched competencies, and they helped entrepreneurs start and grow their companies. We then took that model into a global model that we call Global Connect, and we ended up growing it. But where that led to my understanding of what we're going to talk about today is that as we were going around the world helping places build technology ecosystems or innovation ecosystems, something interesting was happening. One is that almost all the books that I had read and the people were writing about innovation, what I was experiencing by doing it firsthand on the ground was completely contradictory to what they had written about. They talked about things like innovation clusters, that if you just put a lot of smart people and resources in close proximity, magic happens. And what we were finding going around the world starting innovation systems is that the greatest predictor of a system success or an entrepreneur success was more the social and human systems that were put into place. The culture played a critical role in how well a community supported and helped grow innovation. So that informed a lot of our work. We came up with a framework to describe what we were seeing, and that became a book called The Rainforest, The Secret to Building the Next Silicon Valley. That then gave us even more opportunities to do innovation. And this was the first step on the journey. During this kind of period of discovery where I was trying to learn a lot, I came into colleagues at Stanford University, and Stanford and the company called IDEO were kind of the centerpiece of design thinking. And it was a process to really, well, in fact, I'll tell you a little anecdote. The first time I was learning about this, I went to the Stanford D School, which, by the way, is only a label. There's no physical place called the D School. It's a set of kind of classrooms and programs that you can do there, and it sits within the engineering school at Stanford. But when I went to one of the gentlemen who was responsible for the creation of the D School, I asked him, so what is this thing called design thinking? Because it hadn't been popularized yet. And he says, oh, that's simple. Design thinking is all about teaching empathy. And I kind of wasn't expecting that. I said, well, who do you teach this empathy to? And he says, we teach empathy to bad people. So I kind of like that. Who would you consider a bad person? He says, well, you're a bad person. And I said, why am I a bad person? He says, because as entrepreneurs, you go out in the world and you change things without permission. Very often, entrepreneurship, particularly disruptive entrepreneurship, comes down to two critical words: audacious speculation. The ability to be bold and brash, and often to begin down the journey path without all the knowledge you're going to need to do that. Knowing that your actions and the experiments you're going to do in the world are going to be what create the knowledge you need to kind of grow your business or your opportunity. Not everything's going to be known, which means you go down a path of ambiguity. He says, wouldn't it be wonderful when you went out in the world and you try to change the world, by creating new applications or solutions or methodologies or experiences for people, if you could not only look through your eyes and impose your view of the world on them, but if you could actually look through their eyes back at you. That's the exercise we're going to do today. And it's going to really kind of focus our idea. And of course now corporations all around the world incorporate these concepts of design thinking. But design thinking is a lot more than what you think. Now, this is Tim Brown, who's the now the president and CEO of IDEO. He said it's very much a human-centered approach. And I love this concept of human centricity, because the one thing I want to get across, one, you can't make innovation happen. You can only increase the chances that it happens. You increase the chances of it happening by creating a set of conditions, which we're hoping to do here at UCSD through courses like this, through experiences we can give you. And we can't predict which of you will be successful and which idea will be successful. Even when you see, let's say, an Uber and a Lyft, and you talk to both of these companies at the same time, you can see that ride sharing can be very interesting and potentially have a lot of impact, but you don't know which of these companies is necessarily going to win, because not enough information, not enough maturity has yet happened. And so these are very human-centered approaches. The technology in and of itself truly doesn't accomplish anything most of the time. There are processes that are completely autonomous where it does, but usually the reason technology can have an impact on the world is because of what human beings can do with it. So you need to understand human beings as much as you need to understand the technology in order to create a truly worthwhile experience. So as we said, it often starts with empathy, but you need a lot more. Because again, you want to be looking through the eyes, not only of your eyes, but through the eyes of the user. We call it the platinum rule versus the golden rule. Golden rule is do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. We say that's absolutely incorrect. We say the platinum rule is you do unto others as they would want you to do unto them. In other words, try to understand their perspective and then give them solutions that work for them, not just you. The other thing it takes, intellectual curiosity. We find that the greatest entrepreneurs aren't necessarily the smartest. They're not even the most advanced emotionally, but they do have a persistence, and that persistence is often driven from curiosity. Almost all of my work has always started with a question. Well, first an observation that I had made, and then a question like, I wonder why that's happening. In fact, that first book that I wrote actually started that way, where I went around and I said to colleagues of mine who had been studying innovation for well over 20 years and had been the kind of top leaders, thought leaders in the space, and I said, if you've been writing about innovation for 20 plus years, and your books are on every bookshelf of every business school and of every bookstore, why do you think more of it is not happening? Why do you think it's so hard? And I didn't like any of the answers I was getting, because again, they were giving me all the answers from their perspective. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with two colleagues at Stanford who had written a book that changed my life. And the book was called The Knowing-Doing Gap by Pfeffer and Sutton. And you don't necessarily need to get it, because I'm going to tell you what it said. It basically said that knowing what to do and doing it are two very, very different things. That as much as we love to believe that human beings are these intellectual, rational things, we're actually emotional. And we have this sentient nature, a higher consciousness. And our better self is often ruled through that emotional side, which is why we can rationalize and do things. So when you make an argument, when you build a business opportunity, when we talk about entrepreneurship and innovation, and we'll get closer or deeper into your ideas, there's always two arguments you have to attack. One is the intellectual, which we say is why you, why now, and who's going to care. But the other one is the emotional. You got to get me to remember you. You got to get me to care about you, and you got to get me to act. And these are things that are always playing against one another. Now, the other thing is you have to learn how to be really good at asking questions. So you're curious and saying, gee, I just observed that. I wonder why that's happening. And through this process of questioning is what delivers it. Now, this quote didn't even come from Einstein. Someone just probably put his name attached to it. But I liked what it had to say, because it said, look, if you really wanted to kind of know the answer to something, if you spent the first part of your conversation really trying to understand what the right questions to ask are, then the solution will be a lot easier. Today, in your exercise, what we're going to do, and the wallet exercise, is you're going to be doing a lot of questioning, because it's those questions that are going to elicit answers, which then leads us to the next thing you have to be very good at, which is learning how to be a good listener. Learning to, when people tell you something, what they're really meaning. What is their intention, their motivation? And so very often you can actually do exercises to learn to be a much better listener. And the combination of the questions and the listening will be quite good, because after you listen, you'll be able to ask, so if I'm hearing you correctly, I think what you're saying is this. Is that true? And then they can come back and say, no, that's not quite what I meant. Or you can ask, gee, I see you probably had a bad experience with this. Why was it? And there's an old apocryphal quote from Henry Ford, which of course never took place, but people use it all the time. And they said, if we only built products that people truly kind of articulated or wanted, he said, in my case, I would have just given people a faster horse. So very often the true innovation you need to do and the true solution will often jump over what people are actually articulating, which is why you need to be a really good listener. Now, traditional design thinking, which we're going to go over right now, is about what's called articulated needs. Asking lots of questions and getting people to tell you stories about themselves, about their lives, how they use things, and that will give you greater insights into how your potential solution will be affecting them. Now, you can look at all these kind of interesting charts which kind of push out what design thinking may look like, but this one is a good simple one, because particularly academics or people who work in academic environment, we have no trouble with analytical thinking. In fact, if you actually look at the curriculum of most universities, and even before that, even in our high schools, the classes tend to tip much heavier in favor of classes with analytical and critical thinking, and far less on the constructive and intuitive thinking. Not telling you necessarily what to think, but how to think, how to listen. And where those two pieces come together, the constructive and the intuitive, the critical and the intuitive, where those come together, that's kind of the design thinking process. That's where you kind of get to the really good stuff of what we're happening. And by the way, we're so used to seeing design all around us. We're used to seeing, of course, manifested physical design, things like chairs or pens or wonderful things that we happen to like. Of course, we can design our built environments too, to have wonderful buildings that give us emotional insights. And then, of course, we can even use design to plan cities and how people move in between them. But we can take them even further. You can actually design governance and governments. You can design social systems. And a lot of my work is more on the social engineering side of things than it is on the mechanical or technical design of things. So innovation can be used in a lot of different frameworks, and we hear the word innovation all the time. I don't want to spend too much time saying whether your definition is right or my definition right. We kind of know or feel what innovation can be, and of course we can have incremental innovation and breakthrough innovation and disruptive innovation, and we'll give you copies of all these slides so you don't have to memorize them. But it really has to do with how well is the problem defined and how well is the domain or the area we're going to go into define. So you can imagine when you're offering someone a better spreadsheet solution, that's building upon something that we already know. But when you're introducing new ideas like social media, or social networking, those are models which haven't existed before, certainly not in the way we had them before. And so the domain is not necessarily super well defined in what they're going to do. And so the way you build these kind of companies will be different. And this gives you kind of more of a kind of very kind of specifics in terms of what kind of incubators and accelerators support systems you need to build these various kinds of entities. So as I said, all innovation is human-centric, and so what we really need to do, and what we're going to focus on a lot in this class over the next several weeks, is really about how do we upgrade the human operating system. It's not just about the technical operating systems, although we will touch on those a little bit. And an example or a case study that I often do of this is what we call the religion of Apple. And the thing was, how did Steve Jobs get everyone in the world to act like his employee without ever putting them on the payroll? Why is it that when there's a new launch of an Apple product, people will stand in line or pre-order things weeks in advance, but yet they don't do the same thing for their comparable products in general? And it's interesting too, because very often when you look at the technical specifications of these products, they aren't even as good as what's already been out. And some of the commercials actually make fun of that. And yet people will still stand in line because they have an emotional connection to their products more than just a utility connection to what they're doing. And that was a big insight for me when I looked at kind of what the difference between these technical behemoths were, particularly as we looked at companies like Apple and, let's say, a Microsoft or Nokia. What's interesting about like a Nokia or a Motorola or an Apple is these are primarily engineering companies. And so they see the world as a set of engineering challenges and problems. And once they can solve those problems, then they hand them to the designers to put it in a form function, to give it utility, and to put it then into your hands. Apple saw things very much in the reverse. They saw the world as a design challenge, that if you wanted people to use these wonderful technologies, you had to use a more human-centered approach. You had to build it the way humans would use it, the way they'd relate to it. Because once they did and they felt good about it, not only would they use it, but then they would give you their loyalty in doing so. And that's kind of where we got. Now, what was interesting is that if you look at this map, so this is a map from the late 1400s, and it's called a Borgia map. Now, what's interesting about this map, which you can't see from your perspective, is around the edges of this map was a Latin inscription that said, Hic sunt dracones, here be dragons. And what that basically meant is you only need to stay on the center part of the map. We've mapped it for you. You're good to go. We're going to tell you what the world looks like. And for now, that's all you need to understand. But imagination is actually more important than knowledge. To use your creativity, because knowledge will only help you with what has been and what is possibly now. It won't help you on what can be and what is possible. That is where your imagination kicks in. So through some of these exercises we're going to do over the next several weeks is how do you take your knowledge base of what you already know, how do we mix in a little imagination to help you think what could be and how could the world look differently? And those two will actually propel you. Now this is what the D School actually looks like at Stanford. On the left-hand side is actually the engineering school. The right side is kind of more of the studios and workspaces that are in the D School. The reason this picture is interesting, in fact, this is them running through one of the same exercises you guys are going to just about to do. But these signs that are kind of hanging up in the D School. One, this one particularly says, nothing is a mistake, there's no win and no fail, there's only make. So design thinking is very much biased towards action, towards actually doing something and making something happen. Now, this is the other side of the D School, and you can see from the back of the sign, it's that same sign that's written. And it says the only way to do it is to do it. Again, bias towards action. A lot of our work is not trying to overthink it, because we have to build things and prototypes and get them in the hands of the people, and they will tell us how to improve things. So to think that we are so smart and we know everything and we have all the knowledge to create the perfect products is never that way. In fact, if you look at some of the most disruptive companies that have grown up, including our own Qualcomm here in San Diego, very few companies end up becoming famous for what they originally started out doing. Instagram was not photo sharing, Uber was not ride sharing, Qualcomm was not chipset designs. And so you often see that this journey of exploration, discovery, experimentation, and learning ends up often helping companies trip onto the thing that's really magical and important. So you have to be kind of open. So this is what the design thinking process looks like from a very reductionist standpoint. It's a series of journeys that you go, or steps you go through for a journey. This kind of maps to the traditional things that you'd want to know in your brain: who, what, when, where, how, all these kind of things. And to do it, and then kind of how we get it. This is another way of kind of seeing it, which is a different one. That on the left, we're trying to understand things, and only once we understand and begin defining it can we then be creating. But even after we begin creating, we have to deliver and learn. And there's an actual step out here, which is learning, which then once we take those learnings, how do we then go back in and completely improve the process? So these are just different ways of visualizing it. This is probably my favorite way, and you're going to hear us refer to this particular slide several times, because really great design or great innovation comes at the confluence of three very critical things. The first one is probably what you're most used to, which is what we call feasibility, which is kind of, can you build it? Is it possible? The second one is viability, which is, should you build it? Does it actually make sense? So even if you build it, is there a business model attached? Do you have a way of getting it into the hands of the customers? Do you have a way of the customers actually showing appreciation back to you by giving you their dollars, or if it's a social type of innovation, you know, their feedback and improvement and their evangelism for what you're kind of doing. And the third is desirability. Does anyone care if you build it? That's one of the biggest faults we often see entrepreneurs who pitch to us for investment make. They come and they say, we've come up with this great idea, and I say, okay, give me demonstration of whether customers like this or not. They said, oh, everyone told us it's wonderful. I said, but what can you show me that will demonstrate that they actually care? You'll often hear about this word traction. What kind of traction do you have in the marketplace? How many people, and even if you haven't built your product, have people pre-registered for your product? Have you done a Kickstarter campaign? Give me some kind of insights that people will actually care about your solution, because very often entrepreneurs solve problems for the market and the market doesn't care, or they don't care in a big enough way to make it viable. Now, this particular slide goes a little bit deeper. This was based on Nicholas Taleb's work. He said, if you were going to build a business, we used to think that we wanted to build a very strong, robust business, you know, and we want to have the best company in the world. But what we find is that great companies are great until they're not, until they're disruptive. So that was kind of Clay Christensen's work on the Innovators Dilemma, is why have some of the biggest companies in the world that had some of the most money and the greatest resources and greatest talent often become extinct because they didn't have the insights. How did small little players, the Davids to their Goliath, disrupt them in the market? And it's because they very much built, you know, what we would call either a robust or a fragile system that went in there, and the first time it broke, it broke. So then we said, you know, instead of building, you know, these robust systems that can resist the challenges of the market or a society, we then wanted to be resilient systems. And the resilience just meant that when it was attacked, we found ways of improving it so that it became better. Okay? But the ultimate company you can build is, or innovate, is an anti-fragile. And what an anti-fragile system is, it doesn't succeed in spite of all the challenges that hit it. It succeeds because of the challenges that hit it. It has a way of learning so fast. It's kind of like the way we do software. We put software out there, and when people hack the software, we learn how to build a better product because someone's hacked it. That's the way you have to kind of do these things, where your customers are constantly telling you what works and what doesn't work, and that way you can build an enduring company. Because as you're hacked, as you have these challenges, you do better. And it's interesting because the new book that I'm doing is called The Religion of Innovation, because I find that this is a lot like religion. It's a belief system that you have. But one of the greatest parts of having a belief system is that we understand that as human beings, we are fallible. We make mistakes. And that will not determine where we get stuck. So when we make mistakes, the next step is to ask for forgiveness. We kind of screwed up on this. Sharing those kinds of insights, but more importantly, how do we redeem ourselves? We redeem ourselves by taking that knowledge and doing better, sharing it with others, or if we pour that knowledge back into our company, we build better products. We give our customers superior customer validation and experience. And so it's only when the head and the heart begin working together is when you get that belief. Again, we think we are this, we are actually this, and really to build a good product and a good company, you need both of these pumping up together. And it's when both of these agreeing that people go, I believe you. And you're going to need that from your investors, you're going to need that from your customers, you're going to need that from the people who work for you. They have to believe in you for you to do that. Now, deconstructing this, empathize. As we said, empathy is wonderful because you have to go into the customer's experience. You have to understand what problem you're trying to solve for them. As an example, if you come and pitch to us for an investment deal, one of the questions I'm going to ask you is I'll give you a blank profit and loss statement, and I'll say this is not your P&L statement, this is your customer's P&L statement. Where do you sit on your customer's P&L statement? Now, if you can't tell me that, that tells me you have not taken time to empathize with the customer because you don't really understand how you're helping them, how your help or your assistance or your solution manifests into them. And Dale Carnegie wrote in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, you always have to explain to the customer how it's in their best interest to work with you. It is never about you. It's always about them. And when you're obsessed about your customer and the experience that they're having, that's when you build companies that can be sustainable. So again, you've got to care about their lives. You need to know how they're using it. The next step after you empathize with them and you think you understand is you need to define that. You need to take what you've just learned and begin putting it down and having then a conversation. So you have to frame the problem is the only way to create the right solution. And we're going to do that today. Ideate. It's not about coming up with the right idea or the perfect idea. It's about generating lots of possibilities. What's interesting is you will see from this next slide, and I don't mean to kind of overwhelm you with this one, but this is a framework that I work in and with my research, and it was created by a colleague of mine, Dave Snowden on Kinevin. All it says is that all the problems you're going to try to solve in the world exist in one of these 4 domains or realms or whatever you want to call them, buckets. All the problems. These are obvious or simple problems. These are things that there's such high consensus. We know we have to pay taxes. We know we have to drink water and get rest. These are things that we know, and you don't have to spend a lot of time debating. Most of the time we spend our time in the complicated world. This is where there's very much cause and effect relationships. We build models of predictability and probability. If we do X, then we're likely to cause Y to happen. These are the things where a lot of our scientific experimentation happens. This is how we build both economic and social, mathematical, physical models in the world, and it's about sense, analyze, and respond. But this is where the good stuff happens in complexity. It's the emergent phenomenon. It's blockchain. 7, 8 years ago, it was ride sharing. It's where a lot of these things become emergent, and we only know the cause and effect correlations in hindsight. And it's about probing the market and then doing things. This is where emergent and where what we call disruptive innovation actually comes out of. And it's no longer about predictability and probability. It's about possibility and plausibility. So as you create your solutions, as you do it, really what you're going to find, and we're going to cover this next week in the business model, when you go to start your journey with a startup company and you take everything you know and put it on paper, 90+% of it is going to either be assumptions, hypotheses, anecdotes, observations, or your interpretation of the facts. Only a very small point will be actually true facts. And the other thing is that there are no facts inside this room. All facts actually exist out in the market or in society. And you often have to get off your butt and go out in there to actually find what they are. And then only once you begin having these things and you surface all these possibilities of what you can do, then you can begin prototyping. Because once you begin prototyping and building things, then you can begin getting these things into the hands of the people you need to do. So build to think and test to learn. It's the whole agile development. And then, of course, you test the solution. It's an opportunity to learn as you test them or you get them out in the market and people are using these things and playing with them. It's a great way to learn about your solution and your user. Because again, it's this dynamic intersection between the solution you've created and how people use it that is really the magic. Years ago when Intuit was first starting and they were creating their Quicken software, one of the ways they did customer experience and they learned about it is when people purchase their software, they would sometimes ask them, can we kind of go home and observe you using the software because we want to understand how people use it. And they would literally sit there when people would put in and boot up the software and kind of load it. They'd watch how many times did they have to go to the instructions. How intuitive were the signals? Did they go to it quickly, or did they have to search around? Did they get stuck? Because it's only in that testing and the learning that you really find out if you've really kind of hit it. Because chances are in your company, you're going to have a bunch of engineers or technically proficient people who have a whole history of learning how to do things. But when you take your solution and put it in the hands of the people who may not be as experienced, they may struggle with it, and you need to learn how that kind of works. And then ultimately, all of it, as I said, comes down to this. It's not only you've got to believe in yourself, but you've also got to be really authentic as you kind of go down this journey. So, in front of you, we've, I don't know if everyone's picked it up. If not, we will get them to you when you checked in. This one document we're not going to use right now. This was actually meant for you to take home with you. This is a needs finding. We call it a crib sheet. And it just talks about needs finding. Now, a lot of design thinking is actually based on this concept of articulated needs. We go out and we ask questions, and as people give us answers, and as we listen to them, we begin to better understand what their needs are. Not what solution they will want. It's not what do you want us to build for you, but what problem are you trying to solve? Once we understand that, then you can get that, and Gwen will kind of help you. This is the one we're going to be working from today, and we're going to actually have you working in pairs because you're going to have to actually talk to another human being for this. And so it's a very condensed exercise. It is not meant to teach you everything, but the best way to learn design thinking, as we said, we're biased towards action, and it's just by playing a little bit. Playing is really, really important. And so we're going to be doing. Now, there's two exercises, and by the way, this is from the Stanford D School, but it's open source, and they've generously allowed us to use this to teach. And I find this to be quite a nice little introduction. In fact, at Stanford University, every incoming freshman must take Introduction to Design Thinking in order to graduate. So it's a required course for everyone coming into the university. And this is just a quick way to kind of do it. Now, there's two exercises, and I decided to be nice to you guys and give you the easier exercise to do today, because we were having a kind of a slightly larger group. One's called the wallet exercise, and the reason Stanford decided to use a wallet as the thing we're going to kind of build and work around is because the wallet happens to be one thing that's used in nearly every culture. This concept of basically not only carrying your identity, but often storing the things that you often care about. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just credit cards, but it could also be pictures, it could be currency, money, or just whatever you might treasure or that you think you need to have with you, like your insurance card or other things. The other exercise we aren't going to do is the gift-giving experience. What they found is that particularly for analytical people who work their day in a lot of analytical and very linear type of jobs or an effort, the gift-giving experience takes you out of your realm because you have to think about not just the gift you're giving, but about the experience you want to create for that person. We aren't going to do that one today because I didn't want to stress you out. Believe it or not, we actually do have, I brought a, we like to have music playing as well. And since I figured that we do not have any kind of general music, I don't know if my little Bluetooth speaker will be loud enough for you guys, but we'll see whether we can actually get something going on that.
Got a little bit of a taste and experience for what this is. As I said, we'll give you all the process documentation so you can run these exercises on your own. And there, I can wish you a good night. Okay.